Marcus Johnson never expected that a simple evening meal would change his life forever. He wasn't looking for trouble. He wasn't looking for a fight. He just wanted dinner. But sometimes the ugliest truths about society reveal themselves in the smallest of moments. And what happened to him that night inside an upscale restaurant would not only expose deep prejudice, but also prove that justice has a way of finding those who think they can get away with mistreating others. This is a story of arrogance, humiliation, and the sweetest form of redemption. It was a Friday night, and Marcus had just finished a long day of meetings. He was exhausted, but also quietly proud of what he had accomplished. He had spent the day negotiating contracts for his company, a multi-million-dollar firm he had built from the ground up. Dressed in his tailored suit, polished shoes, and subtle wristwatch, Marcus looked every bit the successful businessman he was. To him, it was just another evening. To the staff of the restaurant he was about to enter, however, it was something else entirely. Marcus pushed open the glass doors of Wilton's Steakhouse, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. The kind of place that boasted of fine wines, chandeliers, and a guest list filled with celebrities and corporate elites. He had heard about the place for years, but had never bothered to try it. Tonight, he thought, would be different. He wanted to treat himself, sit back, and enjoy a meal worthy of the week's victories. But the moment he stepped inside, he felt it, the shift in the air. Conversations slowed, heads turned. The hostess, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a practiced smile, froze for a moment when she saw him. She quickly adjusted her expression, but Marcus caught it. The flicker of disdain, the flash of judgment. "Good evening," Marcus said warmly, stepping toward the front desk. The hostess didn't return the warmth. Instead, she looked him up and down, as if assessing whether he belonged. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone clipped. "No," Marcus replied calmly, "but I was hoping to get a table for one." The woman sighed, exaggerated, as though his request was unreasonable. She tapped the screen in front of her, her lips pursed. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight." Marcus glanced past her shoulder into the dining room. At least half the tables were empty. A couple had just walked in behind him, and without hesitation, another host greeted them with smiles and ushered them to a table. Marcus watched silently, his jaw tightening. "I see," Marcus said evenly, "but I couldn't help noticing there are open tables." The hostess leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Sir, this is an exclusive restaurant. We cater to a certain clientele. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable someplace else." The implication was clear. Marcus was black, and in her eyes, he didn't belong. For a moment, Marcus considered speaking up, demanding the same treatment given to every other customer. But then, something inside him shifted. He didn't want to beg for dignity. He didn't want to argue his worth to a woman who had already made up her mind. So he nodded slowly, almost smiling, though his chest burned with quiet rage. "You're right," he said softly. "Perhaps I would be more comfortable someplace else." And with that, he turned and walked out, his steps measured, his head held high. But inside, he was seething. Not because he had been denied a meal, but because of the arrogance, the dismissal, the belief that he could be brushed aside without consequence. That night, Marcus didn't eat. He didn't even feel hungry. He sat in his apartment, overlooking the city skyline, staring at the lights, thinking about everything he had gone through in his life. The long nights building his business, the countless rejections he had faced when investors doubted him, the subtle remarks he had endured in boardrooms, the assumptions, the underestimations. He had risen above them all, but somehow this cut deeper. Maybe because it wasn't about money, it wasn't about status. It was about humanity, about dignity. And that was something no one had the right to deny him. But Marcus wasn't just any man. He was a man who believed that the best response to injustice wasn't anger, it was action. And as he sat there, an idea began to form in his mind. An idea so bold, so poetic, that he almost laughed out loud at the thought of it. If they thought he didn't belong in their restaurant, he would make sure that not only did he belong, but that he owned it. The next morning, Marcus made some calls, and by noon, he had a meeting scheduled with the regional director of Wilton's Steakhouse franchise. The regional director, a sharp businessman named Thomas Green, was surprised when his assistant told him who had requested the meeting. Marcus Johnson was not a name to be ignored. In the business world, his reputation was formidable. He was known as the man who turned failing companies into multi-million-dollar powerhouses, the kind of leader who walked into a room and left with deals that others couldn't even dream of. Thomas agreed immediately, not wanting to miss the opportunity. Marcus arrived at the franchise headquarters dressed in his usual quiet elegance. Nothing flashy, just confident. He carried himself with the calm of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. And when he shook hands with Thomas, his grip was firm, his eyes steady. "Mr. Green," Marcus began, his voice smooth but direct, "I'm interested in purchasing one of your franchises." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "A franchise? That's quite a venture. May I ask what sparked your interest?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, offering a small smile. "Let's just say I had an experience at one of your locations last night. An experience that made me realize your brand has room for improvement." Thomas frowned slightly, sensing more behind the words. But Marcus didn't elaborate. Instead, he slid a folder across the table. Inside were financial statements, bank documents, and proof of assets. Everything needed to show he wasn't just interested. He was capable. Very capable. Thomas flipped through the papers, his eyes widening. This was no average customer. This was a man with serious resources, serious ambition. "Well," Thomas said finally, "I think we can certainly discuss the details." By the end of the meeting, Marcus had what he wanted, the first step toward ownership. The process would take weeks, maybe months, but money talks, and Marcus had plenty of it. Still, he wasn't interested in just owning any franchise. He wanted that franchise, the very restaurant where he had been humiliated. Over the next few days, Marcus worked quietly, strategically. He called his lawyers, his accountants, his network of advisors. He moved with precision, never revealing his true motive. And while the staff at Wilton's Steakhouse continued their days, turning away people they judged unworthy, they had no idea the man they had dismissed was preparing to become their boss. Meanwhile, Karen, the hostess who had humiliated Marcus, bragged about the incident to her co-workers. She laughed, mimicking his calm voice, twisting his words into mockery. Some of the staff chuckled nervously, too afraid to challenge her. Others stayed silent, uncomfortable, but unwilling to speak up. The manager, a man named Richard, turned a blind eye. To him, Karen was efficient, and efficiency mattered more than fairness. What none of them knew was that their arrogance had set the stage for the biggest shock of their lives. Weeks passed. Marcus kept his distance, biding his time. He wanted the paperwork to be finalized before making his move. And when the call finally came, confirmations of ownership, he smiled to himself. The moment had arrived. The next evening, Marcus returned to Wilton's steakhouse. He wore the same suit he had worn the night he was denied service. He wanted everything to look exactly as it had, so the irony would be undeniable. Karen was at the front desk again, standing tall with her nose slightly in the air. She spotted him and immediately rolled her eyes. "Oh, not you again," she muttered under her breath. "Didn't I tell you we're full?" Marcus didn't respond. He simply walked past her, calm and collected. "Excuse me," Karen called after him, raising her voice. "You can't just walk in here." By now, other diners had turned to watch. The room grew tense. The manager, Richard, stormed over, his face flushed with irritation. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave immediately." "You can't just—" Marcus raised his hand, silencing him. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. He handed it to Richard, who snatched it impatiently, his eyes scanning the words. And then his face drained of color. The paper wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a letter of demand. It was the official documentation of ownership. Marcus Johnson was now the franchise owner of Wilton's Steakhouse, this very location. Gasps rippled through the dining room. Karen's mouth dropped open, her bravado vanishing in an instant. Richard stammered, his lips struggling to form words. This must be a mistake." Marcus shook his head slowly, his expression calm but resolute. "No mistake. As of today, I own this restaurant. Every table, every chair, every brick. And that means I own the decisions made here, including who stays and who goes." For a moment, silence filled the air. Then Marcus turned, his eyes locking on Karen. "Last time I was here, you told me I didn't belong. You told me to go someplace else. Well, I've taken your advice. But this time, it's you who doesn't belong. Pack your things. You're done here." Karen's face turned pale. She tried to protest, her voice shaking. You can't do this." But Richard cut her off, his tone suddenly submissive. "Yes, he can. He's the owner." Karen looked around desperately, hoping for someone to defend her. But no one did. Not the staff who had once laughed with her, not the diners who now whispered among themselves. She had humiliated Marcus without mercy, and now she stood alone in her own disgrace. Marcus didn't linger to watch her humiliation. He wasn't there for vengeance. He was there to prove a point. He walked to the center of the dining room, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "This restaurant is now under new ownership. And let me be very clear. Under my watch, everyone will be treated with dignity and respect. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, or what you look like. If you walk through those doors, you will be welcomed. Because no one has the right to decide who deserves respect and who doesn't." The room erupted in applause. Diners clapped, some even standing in admiration. The staff shifted uneasily, realizing the standard had changed. And Karen, humiliated beyond words, stormed out, her footsteps echoing against the marble floor. Marcus exhaled slowly, a weight lifting from his chest. He hadn't just bought a restaurant. He had bought justice. And in doing so, he had sent a message far louder than any argument, louder than any protest. A message that would be remembered. Because the truth was simple. Those who look down on others often forget that tables can turn. And when they do, the very people they dismissed may be the ones signing their paychecks tomorrow. And so, the man who had once been told to leave found himself at the head of the table, not as a guest, not as a customer, but as the owner. He had walked out humiliated, but he had returned victorious. This story isn't just about Marcus Johnson. It's about every person who has ever been underestimated. It's about every person who has ever been told they don't belong. It's about proving that dignity cannot be denied and respect cannot be taken away. It can only be given or withheld. And those who withhold it often find themselves facing the very people they once dismissed, only this time on equal, if not higher ground. Because the truth is, tables always turn. The arrogant become humbled, the proud become exposed, and those who once held power often learn the hardest lesson of all, that the people they dismissed were the ones they should have respected all along. Marcus Johnson's story reminds us of one final powerful truth. Never let anyone else decide your worth. Stand tall, act with integrity, and let your success speak for you. Because when justice comes, it doesn't knock, it walks in calmly, confidently, and leaves no doubt that the tables have turned. Always treat people with dignity and respect. The person you look down on today may be the one you'll look up to tomorrow.